for many care experienced children and people who may communicate how they're feeling in various different ways, often people see the communication of their feelings as negative behaviours, and they are judged therefore on the way in which they're communicating how they're feeling, rather than looking beneath that and thinking, well, what is this telling us about their life experience and how best can we support them?
Welcome to Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. We believe in harnessing the power of singing to improve mental health and well-being for children and young people. I'm Celi Barberia.
And I'm Baz Chapman. In this series, we've paired guests from different areas of research, practice and strategy to make connections and to understand more deeply the unique role of singing, songwriting and creative music making in transforming children and young people's mental health and well-being.
This second series focuses particularly on how we can inspire young voices, and especially on how children and young people who have particular challenges in their lives that can affect their mental health can be supported through singing and music making. Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation.
Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. It really will help us to get the word out. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. Joining Celi and me on Inspiring Voices are John Kelly and Jenny Young. John is a self-taught musician with over 30 years live experience. Identifying as a disabled person, John is a lover of and fighter for equality, inclusion and human rights. As well as his busy career as a gigging musician, John works as a music education practitioner, specialising in music and vocal work for disabled people. Jenny is passionate about connecting people, communities and organisations to find new ways to build relationships, placing creativity at the centre of this process. She's founder and director of North East England-based Blue Cabin, which helps care experienced children build better, stronger relationships through artist-led creativity. Now, welcome both. One of our main areas of focus for this second season of Inspiring Voices is looking at the impact on children and young people's mental health and well-being as a result of other life factors or life experiences, and therefore what benefits singing and vocal work might have for them. So, John, I wonder whether perhaps we could start with you, and maybe could you tell us a bit about growing up as a disabled person and how that affected your mental health?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I had quite a long journey thinking about it when you asked me in preparation for this. I think generally I had a really good childhood. I kind of have grown up feeling quite complete and loved and supported. I think those things are really, really important. I think my kind of experience as a disabled person, I was thinking about the impact on my kind of lived experiences of being treated differently. So I went to a segregated school. I went to a school that was just for disabled people. So that sense straight away being treated differently and going to a school that nobody else went to was something that made me kind of a bit confused about who I was and where I fitted and belonged. The kind of social pressures to do normal things, whatever normal is, those kinds of ideas of having to fit in with, well, this is what you do, and this is what you're allowed to do, and that being decided for me by professionals had quite an impact on probably me being a punk and rebelling against it all. So the kind of confusions and contradictions of being told that there's this kind of projected idea of normality as opposed to my actual lived experience, which was actually my mum and dad saying, what is it you want to do? And you can achieve anything you want to. And out you go and explore and find your way. I went to school when special educational needs was a brand new concept. Can you believe? That's how old I am. It was not thought about when I started going to school, we didn't have to learn a curriculum because disabled people didn't learn things. We just kind of were there, and our time had to be filled. Gladly, times have changed. So I kind of had an experience of being done to a lot, being experimented on, being normalized. You know, I've got to be able to walk. I've got to go to a mainstream school. I've got to fit in. So these kind of ideas, these kind of social pressures that still exists today for many young disabled people, but maybe in slightly different ways. But those kind of ideas of those contradictions of being told you have to be this kind of person when actually your lived experience is, oh, actually, I'm this kind of person. So those kind of things. And through that journey, I was lucky that I was able to think about my own self-confidence and have people around me that said, you're all right, John, you're great. Go ahead and do it. You're good at that. Find what you're good at. And also, I was lucky that there were a lot of disabled people around me who I could identify with, who were also out and proud, as it were. And I kind of learnt from those. I guess the biggest thing for me was the biggest contradiction was the time I decided or found that I was more in a wheelchair than walking. And that whole kind of contradiction where society sees you as a disabled being a failure or something wrong with you, to actually the reality being, actually, I really loved being in a wheelchair and I could be free and be myself and I could get on with the important things, which hopefully we'll talk about in a few minutes. Music.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. Jenny, I mean, you have a huge range of experience of working in lots of different areas of society and music making, I suppose, but particularly from the point of view of care experience, is some of the stuff that John's saying there chiming with you and the young people that you work with?
Yeah, I think just to say it's great to hear more about you, John. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the things that stood out, I suppose, for me as you were sharing, and important to say at this point, I am not here with lived experience of care, so I am not able to share from that perspective. But in the work that I've been involved in, I suppose some of the themes that connect there are around love, and I suppose perhaps it could be fair to say that whilst love is very present for care experienced children and young people, it might be a bit more complicated and complex and multi-layered um, because of the removal of children from their birth families can certainly complicate feelings of love or make them nuanced, and many of our care experienced children and young people experience grief and loss because they are no longer living with their birth family. They may or may not be with their siblings, and so I think some of those themes around love and not necessarily being with birth family can be and feel perhaps quite complicated. Certainly, the sense of who am I can be at the heart of a care experience life, and their opportunity to explore their identity on their terms may or may not be may or may not be in their gift. And so whilst it's fundamentally vital for care experienced children and young people to have a sense of, well, who am I and why am I living where I'm living? Why have I been removed from my birth family? Why am I in a different school? Or why may I may not see my siblings? That theme of identity is perhaps something that isn't supported enough for them to explore on their own terms. So identity, I think, is it something again that may be a concept that needs more thought for care experienced children and young people. I think that sense of how they are seen by society and how that's different from the perception they have of themselves, and how there can be a lot of stigma attached to being in care, and that is often based upon untruths. things that aren't factually correct, things that don't resonate with their experience of the care system or their lives, and that despite the fact we're in 2024, there is still a lot of unknowns in society about actually what does this care experience even mean, and how do we navigate that. And actually, for many care experience children and people who may communicate how they're feeling in various different ways, often people see the communication of their feelings as negative behaviours, and they are judged therefore on that, the way in which they're communicating how they're feeling, rather than looking beneath that and thinking, well, what is this telling us about their life experience and how best can we support them? So yeah, lots of things that were resonating from what you were saying there, John, for sure.
I think that thing you said about grief is really, that kind of sense of knowing, like, expectations get lowered when you're let down and things go wrong around you. And as a disabled person, like now in life, I really encourage, like, much more higher expectations of what you deserve and what you need, because it's your right to have better treatment. But when it happens to you, your expectations lower, and that impacts on your self-esteem, I think, quite a lot. So those kind of, that thing you said about grief really resonates with me from my experience as a disabled person as well. Also, that kind of thing about just being let down, and that sort of sense of, this must be me, I'm the only one that experiences that. That, I think the thing about segregated education is that sense of isolation that can happen, that's, that impacts on your self-esteem. So being taken away from possibly where you want to be, or not being put where you want to be, perhaps.
I think that's a really insightful point, John, and through the work that we've done with Blue Cabin, certainly, and through amazing organisations like Therapeutic Life Story Work International and Professor Richard Rose, the knowledge and awareness of the emotion and the feeling of shame can be attached, can be felt by care experienced children and young people, because somehow they feel as though it's their fault that they're in the situation they're in, and it is absolutely not. And I think fault is a big word, and it's very value-led, and then there's a lot of judgment attached to that. But yeah, the feelings of grief, loss, and certainly shame is just somehow it's something to do with me, and sometimes something to do with the fact that I am not enough, and just being me is not enough can very much be felt, I think.
Yeah.
It's great, Jenny, that you brought up the creative life story work you do, because if you could talk a bit about that life story work, I think it'd be brilliant, because it's so wonderful.
Yeah, of course, Celi. Thank you for asking. Life story work is statutory, and local authorities have to support children in care to understand why they're in care, what the reasons were, why they're living where they're living, and to support them to understand that past, the now, in order to move forward. And despite the fact that it's statutory, there is no guidance as to what good life story work looks like. Back in 2018, we were approached by a local authority in the northeast of England who said, look, we would like some help to reimagine life story work. Is that something that Blue Cabin could do? And we weren't an expert, so it was really important we found an expert in life story work. So we reached out to Professor Richard Rose, who works internationally, is an expert in life story work, and has really supported deep thinking in this area. So we worked together with Professor Richard Rose, South Tyneside Council, and our team of associate artists to kind of reimagine life story work, because traditionally or historically it can be a very one-off process, whereby it is perhaps a photo album detailing perhaps family members, birth family members. It might be a brief history of why a child or young person might be in the care system. And actually, when life story work is done well and done safely, it can be very different from that. It can be a process which is never off the table, an ongoing conversation which is based upon a child or young person having an understanding of their life experience, knowing that those questions might emerge over time at different points when the child's ready to explore those questions, and should never be done. But we thought, oh, could this be done in a group environment, and could it be creative, overtly creative, whereby it's the beginnings of life story, so not for children and young people who need overt therapeutic support that lasts over time, maybe 12 months. How can it be for those who may have an understanding of their past, but how can we provide them with this creative space to explore key themes so that they can think about how they feel about who they are, their identity, why they're living where they're living, who their friends are, what they want from their future, and how they're feeling. And by providing that safe creative space facilitated by our artist and a pastoral support worker from the local authority, we can understand more about how the child's feeling about themselves right now, and what key things they are concerned about, or what key things they're proud about, or what key things they love about their lives, as well as maybe some of the unanswered questions. So as well as these group sessions, we were also thinking, well, how can we support staff in local authorities to better understand what life story work is? How can we support foster carers? So as well as delivering the creative experiences in person in the northeast of England and online, we also have a website housing all of these resources.
That's brilliant, Jenny. And I wonder, John, does any of that sort of resonate?
Yeah, I think the first the thing that resonates the most is the importance of music to explore stuff. Youth Music have just brought out a report, The Sound of the Next Generation. Something like 84% of young people said music makes their world better. That simple statement. And that's very powerful, that kind of that notion. And 60% of young disabled people want more music in their lives, which is slightly more than non-disabled people. I think something that I was thinking about, that in my young life, the reaction to what I now know as the medical model of disability. So what I experienced was this sort of dominant model, which was I was the problem, I was it's me that's wrong, and then kind of rebelling against that, to be honest, and finding other disabled people who rebelled against that, and realizing that I could use music to escape. I wasn't using it. The dominant model for disabled people is often therapeutic, and I think that's a slightly different story for me in my experience. I wanted to experience connection and actually how I relate to other young people around me. I wanted to identify with my friends and make connection. And so music was my way of making connection, my way to say, I am the same as you. I'm not different from you. You like punk, I like punk. You like metal, I like metal. You like ska, I like ska. I don't like racism, you don't like racism. Ska's our way to fight racism. And that was a connection. And I realised that I had a part to play in that, because I learned the lyrics and we could sing it together or we could play it together. So this sense of grassrootsness, I think, is something that sort of grew in me, and it's still with me now. I've got a passion for going directly and listening to authentic voices, and that bit that Jenny said about our stories, they're just so powerful and important. So I think those are things that really connect with me about why music is so important and how it can shape our lives, and also how we can, when we go on that journey of discovery, it's interesting. One of the contradictions of, again, these contradictions that come about, was a lot of disabled people experience being told, this is the kind of music you can play, or this is the instrument, that because you won't be able to play anything else. And of course, we were all given tambourines. The expectation weren't very high at school. And I was curious about the piano, and, someone with doing it with one finger, you can't play piano with one finger. And of course, now we know that's really easy to do with technology and stuff like that. So we work out our ways. We know how to do it. We work our ways around it. I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but there's something about this kind of idea that, you know, by exploring your own experience through music, is a passport to freedom. It's a passport to liberation. It's a passport to finding a sense of value, and that actually you can play a part in society, and actually you belong. That, which is the most important part, actually, I think. It's not a kind of a charitable act. It's a right. You have a right to be here, and you have a right to achieve, and you have a right not to live to the labels that you're given, but the potential that you have in your heart and soul. Yeah.
Independence sort of comes into my mind. You mentioning, John, about being done too. Jenny, I know within the care system, any young person is going to be surrounded by a whole range of professionals who are there to ensure that they can live the best life that they can. But equally, it's still a sense of, here we are, a bunch of adults trying to do stuff to you, maybe more than with you. So is there something about the things that young people can do that help them to develop their own sort of voice and identity and sense of independence from a system that, in a way, they can't escape, can they?
I think that's a really great question, and one of perhaps the many challenges of the care system is it's certainly set up with the intention to provide that safe structure, the support needed, the and to, I suppose, enable a child or a young person, or support a child or a young person to move beyond the traumatic experiences that they have perhaps faced or they're likely to have faced by being removed from their birth family. I think the challenge lies in it being a system that has understandably strict rules around safeguarding and care and standards. And I think when there is that, I understand why those things are in place. I think what that can, the indirect consequence of that can be that for a child or young person, the space to make mistakes, the space to be in environments whereby there may be creative risk taking, being in spaces whereby they can choose to do something and go, actually, I didn't like that, so I'd like to do something else, may not be at the forefront of people's minds, because this sense of safety and keeping safe and holding safe is perhaps more in direct focus for the professionals. And I think, going back to what you were saying, John, we firmly believe that access to creativity and culture is a right. It is a human right. It's a right enshrined in the United Nations Rights of the Child. And for a lot of our work with Blue Cabin, it is about ensuring that we are challenging or being part of the challenge, whereby ultimately these children and young people in Iraq deserve access to great art and culture. And that might mean anything, ultimately, is what they define as great art and culture for themselves. And they might need time to find out what that is. And a success of our work would be that a child or young person comes to an activity and goes, I don't like that, because at least they've had a chance to come along, try it out, be informed, be like, I would prefer to do something else. I'd like to try that now. And that is a success just as much as progression through a certain creative art form. And so I think a lot of the work that Blue Cabin do is about how can we best support creating those safe spaces where creativity is central, and that relationship building is absolutely part and parcel of that, with the knowledge that ultimately where next for the child or young person is in their choice to make, their gift, their decision, and we shouldn't preconceive any ideas about what they may or may not like. And if they want to come along and as they recently defined in a consultation session we did, they defined creativity as unicorns and glitter balls. So let's explore that with them, because that's what they were really interested in exploring, rather than us thinking, well, creativity is X. Actually, they saw creativity very differently in their own terms to how perhaps strategically or nationally it seems. So yeah, I think certainly being able to provide opportunities for exploration and providing that space so that they can best understand, well, how is this making me feel? How do I feel about this activity? Do I want to do more? Do I want to do less? Do I want to progress in that? And having no preconceived ideas on what their path might be is so important in a system which can often go, this is what we perceive your needs are, and this is what we'll provide you with, and it's quite boxed, even though the intention behind that is based upon love and care.
Yeah.
I think
I think something you're saying there that really excited me was about that it's about choice and control, which is something I think, Baz, you mentioned this thing about independence, and one of the things in the disability movement that we've learned a lot about is the importance of independence, not being doing stuff on my own, or being able to do any sort of prescribed task, but being given the choice and control about how I do that. I can't put my own socks on, but what's really, really important to me this morning is I need to be able to choose my socks, and I need to, if I want to do odd socks and odd colours, that's my choice. And choice and control is really, really important in that kind of non-prescriptive way about doing things. And I think that is as well about freedom, and that space to make mistakes is so important. We all get things wrong, but the power of identifying with others and hearing other people's stories and realizing that I'm not the only one. Change is always key in my narrative, that we're about bringing about positive change where we can all be included. So I think there's something about pace and space that Jenny said as well that really is critical to the experiences that both Jenny shared, but also for me as a disabled person, there's an assumption that I need to fit in to this environment rather than we need to shift the environment and change things.
Inspiring Voices Interlude.
Introducing SingUp's brand new Play Recorder resource, included with SingUp membership. Play Recorder takes children on a learning journey from complete beginners to recorder ambassadors. This is not like any recorder resources you've encountered before. It's all about learning to love the instrument and making a beautiful ensemble sound. We've created 3 12-lesson teaching units for years 3 and 4, complete with pupil-facing videos and PowerPoints, printable resources, and detailed teaching notes. Each unit is based on an original piece of music written by professional recorder specialists with differentiated playing parts for pupils. Children will explore the trails of an enchanted forest, do battle with dream monsters, and voyage through the depths of space. To discover the resources, visit singup.org/play recorder.
On with the show.
Let's get into some of the nitty-gritty about music making and singing. One of the really interesting things about singing in this particular context is that it has these kind of multiple potential benefits. So that could just be simply the value of singing for its own right, just creating a sound with your mouth, and that's great. It can be also that sort of freeing sort of an activity that no one is telling you how to do it. You're following your own way and creating your own stuff or your own approach. But then it can also be a mechanism for being able to process things such as trauma, or being in a disadvantaged place, or actually challenging the system that has put you there. How do you navigate your way around those in a way that can be beneficial for whichever particular young people you're working with?
one of the things that we're really mindful of in the work that we do in Blue Cabin is some care experienced children and young people can be asked about their care experience very regularly. And because of the nature of the reasons why they come into the care system, absolutely will be rooted in trauma, perhaps neglect, abuse. We're really mindful of asking ourselves as an organisation, is it ethical for us to provide spaces where we are asking care experienced children and young people to reflect on their experience of care when that has been traumatic, and knowing that that in itself could be helpful for them if held safely, but knowing that we also have a responsibility to question ourselves as to whether it's okay for us to go there, I think is a really important starting point for us. So the range of activities or programs we offer range from getting involved in creative activities for fun and relationship building and as a human right, through to interventions which are very targeted and focused on a particular theme, like feelings, through to activities whereby we might bring a group of care experienced children and people to talk about their experience of care for a particular reason. So I suppose in answer to your question, Baz, we have got a responsibility as an organisation to not mind the private selves of individuals for our own benefit. And we have to go, who is this for? Who is this for the benefit for? Is this for their benefit, or is this because we need to report to a funder that we've consulted with people in care about their experience of care? And actually, if that's what we're doing, is that ethical or not? So establishing, why are we doing this? Is this what the group want? And establishing those safe boundaries with them and constantly checking in, does this feel okay for you? And do we need to change this or shift this at any one time? And we also know that inherently in creative activities, which is about people establishing relationships together, sharing of the self happens. So we might not set up an activity which is about overtly tell us about how it's felt for you in care or been for you in care, but through developing the relationships with our team, they might share something of themselves, which is very private in nature, not safeguarding private, but private about their past. So we've got to be really mindful of that in setting up the space so that it's not only safe for the child or young person, but also safe for our team. And they know how to hold that, but they have somewhere to take that and process that after the session as well. So yeah, I think intention is the word that often comes to mind, and also challenging our own assumptions of why are we doing this, and is it, whose benefit is it for in the first place? So that's some initial thoughts that spring to mind.
The things that come to mind for me as a disabled person in our sector, which the music education sector, I think that some of the tools, some of the things that we know is around that we want to challenge sort of dominant models of the medical model, and disabled people are still often talked about and the solutions are made for us rather than with us. And I'm sure most of you have heard of like nothing about us without us, which is one of our big calls for change, is this notion that actually disabled people need to be authentically given power to shape things. So there's a lot about attitudinal and physical changes that need to be made, attitudinal equally with physical, and that roots itself in what we know as the social model of disability. And the other thing is about our representation of our diversity. We are intersectional people. We have many strands of difference that inform who we are. And some of those are labels that we don't want, and we don't choose them. And some of them we're very proud of and we look after. And I think that kind of intersectionality goes back to that thing about that, what we were talking about earlier about being prescriptive. It doesn't work if we're prescriptive because it doesn't allow us to bring our whole selves and be authentic. So there's something in our methodology that is about more than just physical access. It's an attitudinal thing that kind of truly values the differences that people bring, and being listened to, being valued. And that's, there's nothing more powerful than writing a song and then doing that to an audience, or doing it in friends and getting a round of applause and all those kinds of things that we know about music. That and I do it not just with disabled people. My work is inclusive, so I work with young people from all sorts of backgrounds, who experience barriers. And I think the last tool in my bag really is about challenging assumptions and prejudice. There's that contradiction between, oh, I've got to tick this box over here and tick that box over there, but actually here I am in the middle and this is what I am. And the only escape is this song that's about my own experience. So I think my tools they're about structures and systems and policies, but they're also about our grassroots practice, what we can do in a session to make it more inclusive, what we can do in a session to make it more accessible so that people can find their way, and I don't assume this is how everyone's going to do it.
So, Jenny, we Sing Up Foundation worked with Blue Cabin on, or commissioned you, in fact, to create a guide around safe spaces. So, which John has outlined some of the hallmarks of what makes a great safe and creative space. What would you add to that from your experience of looking at that?
I think everything that John said and described really resonates. And there are certainly connections to the Safe Spaces resource that we were commissioned to create, or I suppose co-create, because we brought together a lot of practitioners, freelancers and organisations, because it felt very important in that we were able to reach out and facilitate spaces for people in the field sectors to help us come to an idea of, well, what does a safe space look like, feel like, sound like, how can that be experienced for the participants and for the staff. And so yeah, a whole host of people were involved in that process. And I think a lot of the things that John has described really chime with what's in the safe space resource. And there were, I suppose, clustering of themes around felt or internal safety, the environment, emotional safety, relational safety, cultural safety, and moral and ethical safety. And that was very much fed back to us from these conversations about, well, what are the key considerations that somebody setting up a space that was safe, and specifically focused on singing, music making for mental health or well-being. And it very much chimes as well with trauma-informed thinking, trauma-aware working, or empowerment, choice, safety, collaboration, trust, and cultural competency. And so there's these kind of real connections to everything that John was saying. And certainly as well, the knowledge of the uniqueness of every single person, and that they will be bringing their unique selves and strength-based approaches to thinking about children who've experienced adverse, challenging experiences in their lives, and not having this deficit model, but having this asset-based model of thinking about, ultimately, yes, we can think about what a safe space look like. There might be some themes, there might be some ways in which we can provide this safe framework, but ultimately you need to be very aware that you have an individual who is unique entering the space, or a group of unique individuals, and there needs to be that responsiveness in the moment to what they are bringing on that day in that moment. And it was a really valuable process to have those conversations through the commission from the Sing Up Foundation, because there was so much fantastic practice that was happening across the country, but also a real sense of how best can we articulate it, and what's the language for this, and how best can we continue to learn about how we can facilitate these spaces, and come at it from a point of view of curiosity and not ego. It's all about learning and better understanding and sharing together, I think.
So John, as a practitioner yourself, like that responsiveness seems to be a really, really sort of key part of this work. Where does that come from? Does that, like, can that be learned, or is it just something that you have a natural ability to do when you're in a room with young people?
I'm laughing because that kind of response is what I kind of experience all the time. I go into an environment thinking it's one way, and then suddenly it's not quite the way it is, or a bit of technology lets me down, and then I have to think a different way around. So I think what we mustn't forget is the importance of creativity. Actually, creativity in music, but also, being creative to, I live in an imperfect world. I live in a world where there is inequality, and there's injustice, and there's all sorts of things that I want to address and change. So we need to build. I think the step on from safe spaces is a resilient space, a space where I can be myself, where I can say what I need without feeling like I'm a burden, or I'm the only one, or I'm the problem that means, we're not going to be able to, create this lovely band or whatever the thing is. So I think that kind of responsiveness comes from a place of that happening every day in my life. I need to respond to we all do, things don't go to plan every day. So the knowledge that happens is kind of a helpful starting point. I wanted to just chuck in Drake Music, who one of the organisations I work with, have some brilliant resources around thinking about things like access and how to use accessible technology, but also attitudinal stuff. So the journey around inclusion, there's some really nice resources on their website around inclusion. But I think for me, it's always not seeing a barrier as a limiting factor, but an opportunity to change things, and to do things differently. And usually my experience as an artist is it usually ends up being better than I started thinking it would be. I believe that inclusive practice is best practice. I believe that music that comes from disabled and non-disabled people is the most beautiful music, and enriches our lives. And if we don't have it, there's notes missing, there's bits missing in our story. And I'm passionate about that, both in my practice working in music education, but also as a practicing artist. I want other non-disabled artists to think about access for their audiences, access for the listener.
How do you lead in a way that encourages young people to choose and to have control?
I try and listen and hear what people are saying, and then start where people are at. And I think that's really, really important. And I think a lot of what Jenny said about safe spaces are about being kind and being compassionate and being curious, the right kind of curiousness, curiosity about how we're going to bring about difference, or how we're going to make a change, that kind of curiosity. And I think just being authentic. I come to a session and I try and be real. I try and sort of say, I need your help with this. I can't write on the flip chart board. Does somebody want to do it? Is there a better way to do this? Should we draw it? Should we not use paper at all? What's better for us? It's not kind of assuming that I'm the one who's got all the answers, because I don't have all the answers, and every situation will be different, and every journey is different. Jenny said something really important to me, which is, why are we doing it? What's the purpose? And I think that's really important, because that's where it always leads me back to, are we doing things the same, which is often what actually happens. We just end up just kind of tinkering around the edges and not really being bold and brave enough to just rip up the book and just go with what's in our hearts and souls, and listen to what's around us and notice. The thing about curiosity is noticing when somebody's a bit uncomfortable to pick up an instrument. They're a bit scared of picking up an instrument. Noticing that and thinking, oh yeah, I was like that. I was scared of that instrument. And then doing things that give people space to find their way. A methodology I use in songwriting a lot is the shopping list. When we, and shopping lists are great because usually when we write a shopping list, we write it on the most insignificant of things. We write it on a napkin or whatever it is that we find to scribble a few words, and it's in no order, so we're not bogged down on the right at the beginning. We're not bogged down on the first verse, second verse, and third verse. We just get it all out. I need cabbages and onions and tofu or whatever it is that we need, and we scribble it all down. And then we think about, well, that's going to be in that shop, and we plan it out. And this kind of shopping list idea gives us the freedom to not be scared of writing down what we feel. And then we can explore what order they go in and rhyme and whatever you want to do with it and rhythm and those kind of things. But anything that gives you the freedom to kind of find your way. And that can be with the instrument or with a voice or whatever.
Jen, I'm wondering from a sort of an organisational leadership point of view, how those values find their way through your workforce, and where you're looking for consistency versus individuality and all of that kind of thing.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic question, and really connecting a lot with what you said there as well, John. I think that the being kind, I think, is so important, and we are an organisation that really values kindness everywhere. It shows up everywhere, really, really regularly. People are kind because people's lives can be challenging and the work can be challenging, and so being able to be and bring personal into the space as well as professional, but also being mindful of what's private and what stays separate and what I don't bring into the work and why is that, I think is really important. I think for our practitioners, helping them to understand in this work, which is inherently relational and creative, what am I comfortable to share and not share and why, and practicing that because it will change in the moment depending upon who's in the room, but also for our care experience community who often have their private lives shared without their permission and are at the centre of these professional spaces, maybe modelling that. A mantra that we have, particularly in sessions, is share as much or as little as you want, because again, often because of the nature of the system, a child or young person may be asked a lot of questions about their private lives because there's an element of safety and care, and also our sessions aren't about mining that information, and we want to give them complete control over what they share in sessions. And it's really a fantastic outcome for us if they say, right, I've gone away, I've reflected through this creative activity on this, but I'm not sharing it with anybody in the room, and we go, that's fantastic, great. That's a great decision that you've made for you in that moment. You don't have to share anything that you don't want to share. So yeah, the modelling of that. We do a lot of in our organisation in team meetings as well, check-ins and check-outs. So every week we have online check-ins, and a lot of that is about temperature checking and sense checking how people are and showing up and being available. So I spend the vast majority of my day sat on this seat in this room having cups of tea with people on Zoom. And that's so important because if a team member just goes, I need 5 minutes, I need to, where possible, just put everything to one side, get a cup of tea and just be there and listen for whatever they need and have that space for them.
Are we doing enough about practitioner wellbeing in general, do you think, for people particularly working in circumstances where there may be some challenge, but they may equally be, handling. There may be difficult things that get revealed and that sort of thing. Do we need to do more to look after our practitioners and give them space to cope with that?
It's a really interesting question, and really, I think it's really salient right now because I think we could be doing a lot more. I think that a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of our journeys and wanting to get things right and about change and all those kinds of things, we carry it with us a lot, and there's a sense of burnout because people carry a lot of anxiety and stress about either fitting in or whatever, or things not being perfect or not being right, and I think that sense of needing to slow down and create more calm space for people to find their way. The sense that we have to kind of get our words in because we're not going to be listened to. So we have to shout it quickly and loud, and the loudest get heard is really, really detrimental to not listening to the quieter voices in the room. So I think there's something really, really important about listening and creating calmer spaces.
Yeah, I think certainly the focus of our attention as an organisation, because of the intentional focus on care experience community, we also have to focus on, well, how are we supporting our staff? Going back to a word that John mentioned earlier, how are we supporting them to practice resilience and be resilient, and to working in an environment that's healthy, where they are well, and because of what we have come to learn as the emotional labour of the work that they are facilitating, the output of that is that they will absolutely be holding emotional labour from the stories they might have heard, through the relationships that they've established, through some of the facilitated sessions that they have led on. They will be holding that, and that might be held physically, that might be held emotionally, that might be held cognitively, but it is emotional labour. And I think quite a few of the team members in Blue Cabin have come into the organisation knowing that without that in previous roles, we have probably got to the point that John named there, where we were at burnout or had burnt out. And there was a distinct lack of that in other institutions and organisations. So as a team, we were really, really keen to ensure that we were questioning ourselves, constantly going, knowing that we're asking a lot of our team members, how best can we put things in place for them to be resilient in this work, to not get burnt out, not get to the point where they couldn't do this anymore and had to stop. And so with the support of the therapeutic supervisor, Matt Stalker and Louise Wicks, through training from the wonderful Kazoom Arts, through our own journeys thinking about social pedagogy and the importance of the personal, private and professional, we've got kind of a framework of support in place for every freelancer and staff member within the organisation. And it's very important to say at this point, we couldn't do what we do without the freelance workforce. They are vital to our work. They are integral, and we couldn't operate as an organisation without them. So our team come together, paid opportunities twice a year to come along and get support from Matt in a group environment to understand what emotional labour is, what that might look like, feel like, how that might show up in you, so that they can then judge themselves when they might need extra support. And they can also understand what self-care is for themselves, and that's very unique to them. So how can they practice self-care on a daily basis in order to practice things that will help them? And if they need additional support from us, what's in place is also monthly therapeutic support, paid. They have therapeutic supervision every month. They have access to therapists if they need it, and that's paid. They also have reflection spaces, which are paid. And also we do check-ins and check-outs before and after every single session. So if somebody's going to a session with babies and foster carers, music making, they will be checked in with by the project manager. How are you doing? How was that? Would you like a chat? And we know that we need to be responsive and do things that are very unique to certain people. So we know some of them don't like check-ins, but they really like check-outs. So we've got to be very bespoke. Some of them really love reflection spaces and like therapeutic supervision, but actually they get more out of therapeutic reflection spaces. So we've got to really be tailoring as well, because for what works for one person might not work for another. And as an organisation, our trustees sign off that on or around £20,000 a year, we invest in ensuring our staff can be resilient, be well, has the support, has self-care, has training. Because if we didn't, we would start to see that in staff wellbeing, staff absence, freelancers not being able to work. We would start to see that in the quality of sessions. And we have an ethical duty to both the people and the participants, and we have to ensure that that's built into every funding application. And we have never been questioned by any of our wonderful funders on asking for that for our team. But we're on a learning journey, Baz and Celi and John, and we will continue to do things differently and better, because different things will show up in sessions.
Yeah.
I think there's some, what you said about self-care and self-awareness, that, like, you noticed I've been going off camera to get my drink, and that was kind of a really important thing about me starting to realize what I needed to be okay in a space, and to be able to do that sort, just come off camera and go and get my drink because I can't do it on the camera or whatever it is. And I think that self care is part of that is really important. I think musicians really struggle a lot with looking after ourselves. If you're touring, if you're gigging, that sort of thing, like feeding ourselves and all sorts of really simple things like that are really bad. And one of the really useful resources that I found, there's some great work that Help Musicians UK have done to support the mental health and well-being of musicians. So I'd reach out to them and be aware of those kinds of supports, that it is important to look after ourselves, because that's what helps to challenge some of this the danger of burnout, and being a bit brave and bold to say, this is what I need.
Just before we finish, I'd love to find out from you an inspirational vocal moment, either from your own experience or something that sort of illustrates what we've been talking about.
I always struggle with the word inspire, because we're all disabled people are seen as being inspirational, and we're not. We're quite ordinary people who live ordinary lives. But my inspirational musical moment around vocal and singing was in rehearsals for a show that I toured called Reasons to be Cheerful. And our artistic director was a deaf artistic director, Jenny Seeley. And she always found that quite funny, that she was a deaf artistic director directing a musical. And the thing that was most inspirational was this idea of finding layers of music. So we were on stage doing an Ian Jury number, quite raucous, quite rude, quite energetic, and it was havoc on stage. And I realised that my deaf colleagues that I was working with were very likely to knock me out with their elbow flying as they were pogoing across the stage. And I thought, I've got to sing this and survive. And it was just chaos on the stage. And Jenny kind of ripped it all back and said, where are the layers and how do we communicate during this thing? And we all had different needs, and we were all disabled and non-disabled people trying to hold on to this chaos. And we found methodologies, like I had to blow on the back of Steve's elbow anytime it came close to my face, so he would be able to feel on the back of his elbow that I really was very close to his elbow at that time. So it was this kind of messiness of an activity where we just stripped down the layers, and we found moments to make it work again, so that it went from being an inaccessible mess of chaos to being actually a very well planned, choreographed song. So yeah,
oh, great.
Punk lives on.
Layering Chaos is a great name for an album, I think.
I'll write it down.
Yeah, you can have that one. You came up with it, really. Jenny, what do you think?
I used to be a freelancer a while ago now with the wonderful charity called Open Up Music. They are an amazing charity if anybody hasn't heard of them. And a lot of their work can open up orchestras, for example, help special schools. Their description is they help special schools set up accessible orchestras so that young disabled people get first access to music education. And a lot of the work they were doing and still do is around an instrument called a clarion, which is named after the amazing Clarence Adu. and that is around how an instrument that can support accessible orchestras to play, and the clarion is about that playing and about how disabled musicians can use instruments as part to play, but also as their voice as well, and to express themselves through these instruments. And so I suppose if we're using vocal in the broadest sense of the word, being part of not only the setting up of open up orchestras many moons ago in the northeast of England, but being in sessions with their team and with the disabled musicians who were using clarion to play and to have a voice was just remarkable. And the creativity in those faces was just astounding. And the different pathways and the ways to creativity and the sounds that were coming out was some things I've never ever experienced or heard before. And I think it was such an inspiring moment because of the young person really finding their voice through the use of the clarion, and then being able to express themselves and being able to improvise and being able to make music and vocalize in a way that was really tuning into them was just fantastic.
I'm going to finish by I scribbled down something that you said, John, which I think really just sums up what's behind all of this work. Doing things that give young people space to find their way is just says it all. So John Kelly, Jenny Young, thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's been a privilege.
Inspiring Voices, Reflections.
I was so inspired by so much of it, and I loved some of what John was saying about freedom and control and choice, and all of it was just so inspiring.
Yeah, but unusual things as well, things like pace and space.
Oh, I loved
really,
that.
Yeah, really deep thinking about how things happen in the room, and I suppose linking to that idea of the sort of the asset, not the deficit model, the idea that you're ever going to deliver a session which is, according to plan. The joy comes from the fact that you probably aren't, and therefore it's about the creativity in the room. It's not dealing with the unexpected. It's actually it's embracing it and almost encouraging it.
Yeah. And how many of the things that they had in common in their work? I really thought all of what John was saying in the beginning about identity was so amazing. It's like just super interesting. And then how so much of that then also was reflected in the work that Jenny does.
Yeah.
And again, the kind of themes about empathy and kindness, that they both really talked so powerfully about how important kindness is in their work, and listening and understanding where people are coming from and accepting where they come from.
Yeah. One thing I'd not heard before, which I want to think a bit more about, was this thing about a resilient space as being sort of part of what you might call a safe space or an extension of it, where there's absolute safety, and that either there is scope to be vulnerable or there is scope to develop resilience, and that's the amazing thing about this work, isn't it? That those things can be achieved in a way that you could never do by, sitting someone opposite you on a desk, and that journey of exploration and of acceptance feels much more exciting and much more true to what young people might want to do.
Yeah, I also thought, the way that Jenny has consciously gone into really carefully thinking about how she can support all the people who work at Blue Cabin is just, she's such a champion for that, because it's something obviously we've been looking into a lot around practitioner well-being, and she's just really consciously looked into that and done it properly. Like we know Jenny does everything like that, and she's just, it's really commendable what she's put together for her team.
And it's really interesting that, the drivers behind that are, because they see that it's important to do for the future of the workforce and all of that. But actually, it's just an ethical thing. These are people who need support, and we can't champion young people's well-being and development if we're not prepared to back that up for our practitioners. And yet here we are in a sector where so often that doesn't happen. And wasn't it so great when she said, actually, no one's ever questioned it?
Well, I was exactly just going to say that. We've had conversations before where people we can't set it up that we have this huge amount of money that we need to come up with to support this work. But actually she's like, nobody's ever questioned it because everybody recognizes how valuable it is. And I think actually that is so powerful in really being upfront about it. If we want young people to do that, right?
Yeah.
Then the adults around them need to be able to do that too.
We've got to model it. Yeah, that's right. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Inspiring Voices. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify.
Videos of each episode are also available on Sing Up Foundation YouTube channel. For more about us, and to access our library of resources or to donate to support our work, please visit www.singupfoundation.org.
Thanks to Beccy Owen and the Refuge for our beautiful podcast music, specially arranged by Becky and adapted from her song Anemone.